It was a cold January evening in Indianapolis, January 25th, 2025 to be exact. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Around 6:30 p.m., a call came into the 911 dispatch center. The woman on the line was 33-year-old Skylar Gardner, and she was reporting something every parent dreads. She'd found her 2-year-old daughter Skylar unresponsive. She said the little girl was underneath a bedroom dresser. Emergency services, police, and paramedics rushed to the address, an apartment complex in the 6300 block of Newberry Road. When officers arrived, Skylar Gardner met them, repeating her story. She'd been making dinner, she said, called for her 2 young children to come and eat. Her son came, but Skylar didn't. She said she searched the apartment, and that's when she found her, under that dresser. But as soon as first responders stepped inside that apartment, it was clear this wasn't a straightforward medical emergency or a tragic accident. The first thing that hit them was the cold. It was freezing inside, a stark contrast to what a home with young children should feel like in the dead of an Indiana winter. Then, the smell. An overwhelming, nauseating stench that clung to the air. What they walked into was a scene of unimaginable squalor. The apartment was, to put it mildly, a disaster. We're talking trash piled up, human feces on the floors, on the walls, even on the furniture. Please continue to leave your cities in the comments. It's very inspiring to me. Thank you for your incredible support of my channel. Make sure to subscribe and consider becoming a channel sponsor to help continue raising awareness about these important issues. Please share this video with your friends. The little angels deserve to be remembered. Let's get back to the case. Steak knives were just scattered around, along with soiled items, rotting garbage, chicken bones, fast food bags, and open barbecue sauce containers. It was a biohazard, plain and simple. Debris was everywhere. Even a baby crib and mattress were reportedly covered in layers of feces. It was a level of filth that was hard to comprehend, especially as a place where 2 very young children were living. And then there was Skylar. Officers found the little 2-year-old girl where her mother said she would be, under a lightweight dresser with canvas drawers. But it was immediately apparent that something was terribly wrong, beyond just being unresponsive. Skylar was cold to the touch. Tragically, medics pronounced her dead right there at the scene. It was also noted that rigor mortis had already begun to set in, a grim indicator that Skylar had likely been deceased for some time, possibly several hours, before that 911 call was ever made. The dresser itself raised questions. Detectives observed it was knocked over, but it appeared to be resting on a chair. And given its lightweight design, authorities were skeptical from the start that it was heavy enough to have caused fatal injuries to a toddler. But Skylar wasn't the only child in that apartment. Her older brother, Saint, who was described as being 3 or 4 years old, was also there. Officers found him showing clear signs of neglect and malnourishment. He was immediately taken to Riley Children's Health, a nearby hospital, for examination and care. Thankfully, doctors there determined that while his condition was serious and showed the effects of neglect, it was at that point non-life-threatening. Back at the apartment, Skylar Gardner's initial account started to fray around the edges almost immediately. She told police that after discovering her daughter, she'd carried Skylar outside. It was from there, she said, that she contacted 911. She also said she called her boyfriend, Brian Thomas, telling him to come over. But the scene inside that apartment told a story of its own, a story of profound and prolonged neglect. The conditions were so appalling, so clearly dangerous for children, that the focus quickly shifted from a potential accidental death to a criminal investigation. The state of that home, the condition Skylar was found in, and the signs of neglect on her brother Saint, it all painted a deeply disturbing picture. Investigators knew they had a lot of questions for Skylar Gardner, and for anyone else who might have known what was going on behind the closed door of that Newberry Road apartment. The tragic discovery of little Skylar was just the beginning of uncovering a nightmare. Skylar Gardner was just 2 years old. She'd been born on August 21, 2022, in Indianapolis. People who knew her described her as a sweet and happy little girl. One of her favorite things, like many toddlers, was watching Miss Rachel on YouTube. Skylar also had an older brother, Saint, who was around 3 or 4 at the time this all unfolded. Skylar Gardner, their 33-year-old mother, also had a few much older half-siblings to Skylar and Saint. The name of Skylar and Saint's father hasn't been widely publicized, but it's known that he was living in Ohio. According to reports, he had previously agreed to give full custody of the children to Chantel. This decision, he later explained, was due to his own disability. He felt he couldn't raise the children in the manner they deserved because of it. He did, however, try to maintain a presence in their lives, seeing Skylar and her brother periodically. The last time their father had physically seen his children was on Thanksgiving of 2024, just a couple of months before Skylar's death. After that visit, he'd tried to speak to them on the phone multiple times, but he found that Chantel was often unresponsive to his requests to connect with Skylar and Saint. He did manage to have a video chat with both of them in the first few days of January 2025, just a few weeks before the tragedy. His adult children, Skylar and Saint's older half-siblings from their father's side, had also seen the children at some point, a concerning sign that perhaps hinted at the neglect already taking place. Chantel Gardner, meanwhile, seemed to be living a life that was worlds away from the squalor found in her apartment. She had aspirations of becoming a rapper, going by stage names like Chantel Bowyer or Channy B. Her social media accounts, particularly her YouTube channel, projected an image of a rising rap star. She would post videos of herself performing, appearing well-groomed, in clean clothes, with fresh hairdos, often in clean, well-lit spaces. These posts showed a woman pursuing her dreams, seemingly engaged with the world. There were photos of her smiling on stage at local venues, seemingly without a care. She even boasted at one point about becoming a women's basketball coach, portraying herself as someone helping others. This public persona, the aspiring musician, the coach, stood in stark and horrifying contrast to the reality of her children's lives. While she was, by all outward appearances, focusing on her music career and social life, Skylar and Saint were existing in conditions that were, as investigators described, a biohazard. There was little to no mention of Skylar and her brother in Chantel's numerous Facebook posts. One particularly chilling post, published shortly before the tragedy, read something like, "I don't trust anyone except my children, though things aren't so straightforward with the second one." At the time, it might have seemed like a strange, throwaway comment. But in light of what happened to Skylar, her second child, those words took on a deeply ominous meaning for many who later read them. The children, especially Skylar, were almost invisible in Chantel's public-facing life. While she cultivated an image of an artist on the rise, her home was deteriorating, and her children were, as would become horrifically clear, suffering from profound neglect. This double life, the performer and the neglectful mother, was at the heart of this deeply disturbing case. How could someone project one image to the world, while, behind closed doors, her children were living in such appalling and dangerous conditions? That was a question that would baffle and anger many as the details of Skylar Gardner's short, tragic life came to light. The contrast was jarring, a mother apparently focused on her own ambitions, while her two small children were left to fend for themselves in an environment that was not just dirty, but deadly. The descent into the nightmarish neglect that ultimately claimed Skylar's life wasn't sudden. It was a gradual slide that began around October 2024. This is according to Chantel Gardner's own admissions to the police. It started small. She told detectives that initially she'd only leave the children alone while she went outside to meet her boyfriend, Brian Thomas, in his car. Then it progressed. She started leaving them unattended for longer periods while she ran errands, like picking up dinner or going to the grocery store. Her reasons for this, as she explained them, were varied. Chantel claimed she had become overwhelmed by her kids. She said Skylar and her brother often didn't behave well in public. They were, as she put it, children, and of course, they could be challenging. But instead of finding ways to manage typical toddler and preschooler behavior, Chantel decided it was just easier to leave them home. As her absences became more frequent and longer, the apartment began its grim transformation. At first, Chantel said she would try to clean the walls and maintain things, but soon, she claimed, it just got to be too much. The filthier the apartment became, the more Chantel started avoiding her own home. The smell alone became a deterrent for her. She even stopped showering at her apartment because she found the foul odor would cling to her right after. She was embarrassed by it, especially around Brian, so she started staying at his home overnight more and more, leaving 2-year-old Skylar and her young brother alone for days at a time. She did claim, however, that the longest she ever left them alone was for 2 days. During these extended periods of abandonment, the children were often left with the television on. Chantel mentioned that they would frequently be watching YouTube and specifically named the popular children's entertainer, Miss Rachel. It's a chilling image. 2 tiny children, alone in a rapidly deteriorating environment with only a screen for company and supervision. When Chantel did return, she would bring food for them. This often consisted of fast food like McDonald's, Happy Meals, cheeseburgers, or chicken nuggets. Sometimes it was chips or chicken wings. For drinks, she'd bring Gatorade or Powerade. She also told investigators that the children, particularly Saint, had learned to climb onto the kitchen counter to get water for themselves when she wasn't there. The condition of the apartment just kept getting worse. As Chantel spent more and more time away, basic cleanliness became non-existent. Feces started to accumulate on the floors, the walls, the furniture, even, as noted, in the baby's crib. Rotting garbage piled up. Eventually, the smell inside the apartment became so intolerable that Chantel stopped taking her children out in public at all. This also meant she had stopped taking them for any medical checkups or doctor's appointments. The conditions and the smell were simply too revealing. At some point, the furnace in the apartment stopped working properly. In the middle of an Indianapolis winter, this meant the apartment would become dangerously cold. But Chantel decided not to report it to maintenance. She was afraid that if maintenance workers came in, the filthy living arrangements would be discovered, and they would realize her children were being left unattended for long stretches. The impact on the children's hygiene was severe. Chantel admitted to investigators that when she checked on her kids, she had seen feces on their hands and feet. She claimed that any redness near Skylar's vaginal area was simply because of the diapers, not a lack of care. According to her own account, she would, at most, wipe her son down with wipes once a week. Skylar, she said, would get a shower about once a week to try and get the feces buildup off her body and out of her hair. Chantel also tried to manage perceptions with her family. She said that at times when she knew her relatives were going to call, she was intentional about being home with the kids, because she knew her family members primarily wanted to speak with the children. She also reportedly told friends and family different stories to cover her absences, often claiming the children were with Brian or with other friends, when in reality they were alone. Eventually, Chantel claimed to police that Skylar and Saint came to see her absence as normal. As evidence of this, she stated that Skylar's brother, Saint, eventually stopped crying when she left. It's a heartbreaking detail, suggesting not acceptance, but perhaps a learned helplessness in the face of chronic abandonment. The spiral continued day by day, as a mother chose her own desires over the fundamental needs of her 2 small children, leaving them in a cold, filthy prison that would ultimately become a death trap for little Skylar. As investigators dug deeper into the tragic death of 2-year-old Skylar Gardner, the physical evidence from the scene and the subsequent autopsy painted a truly horrific picture of her final months, weeks, and days. The initial skepticism about the lightweight dresser being the cause of death was quickly validated. While the dresser was indeed found on top of Skylar, and police noted it was resting on a chair, the authorities didn't believe it was heavy enough to have inflicted fatal injuries. The full, heartbreaking truth of what Skylar endured came from the Marion County Coroner's Office. The autopsy revealed that Skylar had not died from being crushed, or anything similar related to the dresser incident itself. Instead, the preliminary cause of death was determined to be hypothermia. The little girl had effectively frozen to death in her own home. This finding correlated directly with the conditions inside the apartment. Police had recorded the temperature in each room of the residence, and the readings were shockingly low for a home, especially one with young children in late January. The lowest temperature recorded was a mere 46 degrees Fahrenheit, and the highest was only 51 degrees. Meanwhile, the outside temperature around that time was hovering near 32 degrees, and on some days prior, it had likely been even colder, meaning the apartment could have been colder still on those days. The furnace, as Chantel later admitted, was not working, and she hadn't reported it. But hypothermia was not the only horror Skylar's small body revealed. The medical examiner discovered a multitude of concerning injuries. She had bruises all over her body. These were described as multiple patterned bruises, some circular, about 3/4 to 1 inch in diameter, found across her entire body. One bruise was noted near her vaginal area, and another near her eye. Disturbingly, Skylar also had multiple bite marks, found on her back and possibly under her left arm. These were identified as human bite marks. There were other injuries too, trauma to her inner lower lip and injuries to her feet. Her tiny hands and feet showed signs of frostbite, and then there was a puncture wound on her neck. This particular wound was believed to have been caused post-mortem after she had already passed away, possibly by rodents, given the infested state of the apartment. Internally, the findings were just as grim. Skylar was found to be dehydrated. Tragically, an examination of her stomach contents revealed hair and possible feces. Her intestines contained what appeared to be paint chips, more hair, and other foreign objects. It suggested a little girl so hungry she was trying to eat anything she could find. The condition of her 4-year-old brother, Saint, also provided a stark testament to the neglect. When he was taken to Riley Children's Health, doctors found he had overt signs of neglect and what was termed food disparity, or malnourishment. He was suffering from severe constipation. Medical staff also noted serious emotional and cognitive disorders. He was described as weak and very twitchy, shaky. His trauma around food was profound. He would reportedly have complete meltdowns if anyone tried to take away his food tray, and he ate in huge clumps, requiring staff to intervene to slow him down. While his physical condition was deemed non-life-threatening by one source at the time of admission, another report indicated doctors told police his overall condition was life-threatening, highlighting the severity of his situation. What is clear is that he was suffering acutely from the prolonged lack of care. The apartment itself was officially described by police as a biohazard. The floors were covered in human feces, garbage, and food waste. The walls were smeared with feces and other substances. The stench of feces and urine was overwhelming. Furniture was overturned and clutter was everywhere. The baby crib and mattress were layered with feces. It was a scene of unimaginable filth and danger. A nurse practitioner who examined the evidence, likely related to Skylar's injuries, told investigators that some of the bruises found on Skylar were very suspicious for non-accidental trauma. This raised the terrible question of whether, beyond the profound neglect, Skylar had also been physically harmed by her mother. Chantel would later deny ever physically hurting her children, but the evidence on Skylar's body told a complex and deeply troubling story. The combination of extreme cold, starvation, dehydration, unexplained injuries, and an utterly unlivable environment culminated in a death that was as preventable as it was tragic. When police began to seriously question Skylar Gardner about the death of her daughter Skylar, her story started to change, revealing more and more about the depth of the neglect. Her initial claim, made on the evening of January 25th, was that she had been making dinner around 6:30 p.m., called for the children, and found Skylar unresponsive under the dresser. She also said she carried Skylar outside before calling 911 and contacting her boyfriend, Brian Thomas, telling him to come over. However, as the investigation progressed and the grim reality of the apartment's condition and Skylar's autopsy findings came to light, Chantel's narrative shifted. In a later version, she told police that the last time she had actually seen Skylar alive was around 4 p.m. on January 24th, the day before Skylar was found dead. At that time, she said, she had given Skylar and her brother Happy Meals from McDonald's. Then, she had left to go to her boyfriend Brian's house. Chantel claimed she didn't arrive back home until 6:00 p.m. the following day, January 25th. It was upon this return, she said, that she realized something was wrong because Skylar didn't rush to the front door to greet her as she normally did. Then she found Skylar beneath the dresser and called 911. This timeline itself was damning, admitting to leaving two toddlers alone for over 24 hours. Ultimately, Chantel would make significant admissions to detectives. She confessed that beginning in October 2024, she had started leaving both her children home by themselves. She detailed how it began with short trips, like going out to meet Brian in his car, and then escalated to longer errands like grocery shopping or picking up dinner. She told investigators she had become overwhelmed by her kids and that they often didn't behave in public, so she found it easier to just leave them at home. She admitted she knew she was neglecting her children. However, Chantel consistently denied ever physically hurting her son or daughter. She also claimed that her boyfriend, Brian Thomas, had no idea that she was leaving the children home alone. Brian Thomas, Chantel's 39-year-old boyfriend, also spoke with investigators. According to his account, Chantel had left his home on January 25th. Then, just a short time later, she had called him up, screaming and telling him to come over to her apartment. Brian told police that he had no idea about the deplorable state Chantel's apartment was in. He claimed the last time he had even been inside her apartment was over a year prior. He stated that any time after that, when he would meet Chantel at her apartment building, he would meet her in the apartment's shared hallway, never going inside. Brian further informed officers that Chantel would spend most nights at his place, sometimes as many as 5 days each week. During those nights, he said, she would have her children with her one day at most, and sometimes not at all. The last time Brian claimed to have seen Skylar and her brother was on his birthday, which was December 27, 2024, about a month before Skylar's death. He insisted he had no idea that the children were being left by themselves during Chantel's extended stays with him. He claimed he thought they were either being left with Chantel's family or with her friends whenever she was without them. However, the charges later filed against Brian would suggest that authorities did not fully believe his claims of ignorance. He was accused of lying to hinder the case against his girlfriend. The culmination of the investigation, the autopsy results, the state of the apartment, and the admissions made by Skylar Gardner led to her arrest. She was charged with murder and neglect of a dependent resulting in serious bodily injury. The gravity of the charges reflected the extreme nature of the neglect and its fatal consequences for 2-year-old Skylar. Brian Thomas was also implicated legally. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and he was subsequently charged with 2 counts of assisting a criminal. The accusation was that he had lied to investigators, presumably to protect Chantel and hinder their investigation into Skylar's death. This suggested that law enforcement believed he knew more than he initially let on, or at least had actively tried to mislead them. The web of deceit and neglect was slowly being untangled, leading to serious charges for both the mother who abandoned her children and the boyfriend who, at the very least, was accused of trying to cover for her. The legal process moved relatively quickly, following the discovery of Skylar Gardner's body and the subsequent investigation. By January 30th, 2025, just 5 days after Skylar was found, the Marion County Prosecutor's Office announced that Skylar Gardner had been indicted on charges of murder and neglect of a dependent resulting in serious bodily injury. She had her initial court hearing that same day. Given the severity of the charges and the circumstances of Skylar's death, Skylar Gardner was ordered to be held without bond at the Marion County Jail. Her jury trial was scheduled to begin on April 8, 2025. For Brian Thomas, the legal consequences also mounted. A warrant was issued for his arrest on 2 counts of assisting a criminal, based on allegations that he lied to investigators to protect Chantel. He was eventually arrested. After posting a $6,000 bond, Thomas was ordered to remain on home detention with GPS monitoring. As the case progressed, more details emerged from various sources, painting a fuller picture of the situation. The children's father, living in Ohio, reiterated that he and other family members were completely unaware of the horrific conditions inside Chantel's home. He had tried to maintain contact, but Chantel had often been unresponsive. His adult children, Skylar and Saint's older half-siblings, had previously reported that the young children smelled like urine when they had last seen them, a detail that, in hindsight, was a significant red flag. A friend of Skylar Gardner told police that Skylar had a pattern of deception regarding the children's whereabouts. When Skylar would go out with friends, she would allegedly claim that the children were with Brian. This friend expressed that people would have helped with the children if they had known they were being left alone. It seemed Skylar was adept at telling different people different stories, ensuring no one had the full picture of her prolonged absences. Brian Thomas, facing charges himself, attempted to clarify his side of the story, at least in the court of public opinion. Excerpts from what appeared to be a social media interview or conversation with him were shared in one of the source materials. In this exchange, Brian claimed he was deceived by Skylar. He said she would tell him the kids were with her best friend or her stepdaughter when she stayed at his place. He questioned why he would keep pressing her if she gave these explanations. He insisted he wasn't aware of the neglect, stating that Skylar never smelled bad or showed any outward signs that would make him suspicious of such squalor. He denied that she ever mentioned hurting her kids. He also claimed he was open to having the children at his house, saying he rocked with kids, implying he wouldn't have objected to them staying over. His narrative was one of being duped by a manipulative girlfriend. Interestingly, one source also included excerpts from what were described as Skylar Gardner's jailhouse calls. In these snippets, Skylar seemed to acknowledge the terrible conditions, talking about trying to get shit together. She expressed feeling like a burden and not knowing how to ask for help. There was also a mention of her looking at text messages where she had asked for a pediatrician's phone number and was trying to make appointments with a Dr. Fisher, suggesting some, perhaps belated or ineffectual, attempts to address the children's needs. She spoke of wanting to get the children into a better environment because she knew their current one wasn't safe or clean. These fragments offered a glimpse into her mindset, a complex mix of acknowledgement, perhaps regret, and a sense of being overwhelmed. The news of Skylar's death and the conditions she and Saint endured sent shockwaves through the Indianapolis community. There was widespread shock and outrage, much of it expressed on social media as people grappled with the horrific details. The case served as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of children and the devastating consequences of severe neglect. Meanwhile, Skylar's surviving brother, Saint, was out of that horrific environment but faced a long road to recovery. He had been placed into care, implied foster care, and was dealing with the profound physical and emotional trauma of his experience. His reactions at the hospital, the fear around food, his developmental delays, his twitchy, shaky demeanor, underscored the deep scars left by months of neglect and isolation. The focus for him would be on healing, a process that would undoubtedly take a great deal of time and specialized support. The community mourned for Skylar, a little girl whose life was cut short in such a brutal and preventable way. As the trial date for Skylar Gardner approached, many awaited justice, hoping that the outcome would not only hold those responsible accountable, but also serve as a catalyst for greater awareness and intervention in cases of child neglect. The lingering questions remained. How could this have happened? And what could be done to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again? 2-year-old Skylar Gardner died in her Indianapolis apartment from the effects of extreme neglect, hunger, cold, and unsanitary conditions. Her mother, Skylar Gardner, would leave Skylar and her brother Saint unattended for long periods of time, and neighbors, despite the smells and the children's cries, preferred not to intervene. Some noticed the stench in the hallways, some heard screams, but no one ever called for help. Even the management company, receiving complaints, limited itself to formal notices of cleanliness, without checking the conditions in which the children lived. The children's father, despite being disabled and living in another state, tried to maintain contact, and the adult half-siblings noticed signs of neglect and the general condition of the children. But the alarms were not brought to the attention of the authorities. Skylar actively misled everyone by telling different people different versions of who was looking after the children. This allowed her to hide the extent of what was going on. When Sant was finally found, he was emaciated, frightened, developmentally delayed, and showing signs of severe mental trauma. His behavior in the hospital, fear of food, nervousness, lack of coordination, spoke of the terror he had experienced. Medics recorded signs of prolonged starvation and severe neglect. Skylar's death sparked a wave of public outrage. People wondered, how could this have happened, and why had no one noticed the calamity earlier? Memorials were organized, and the responsibility of neighbors, friends, and social services was discussed online. The case was a painful reminder of how easily children can go unnoticed, even when in plain sight. Skylar Gardner was charged with murder, and her partner, Brian Thomas, was charged with concealing the crime. The investigation believed that Skylar knowingly left the children without heat, food, or care, knowing full well the possible consequences. Thomas allegedly lied to investigators in an attempt to protect Skylar. Skylar's story is more than just one family's tragedy. It is a call for society to not turn a blind eye when children suffer. Neglect is one of the most common but often unnoticed forms of abuse, and everyone who noticed something but remained silent became part of this tragedy. Only a voice raised in time could have saved Skylar. Now all that remains is the hope that her death will be a lesson, and that other children will not be left alone in the cold darkness, waiting for help that never came.